Mark Spark, I'm glad that you can be with us as we begin this time together. We're going to hear from the Psalm of the day, the first couple of verses of Psalm 9. So let this be a time to center ourselves and to get ready to be in God's Word together. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will tell of all your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and exult in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. May this God's word speak to our hearts, our minds, our spirits. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our main reading today is from James chapter 3. We've been in James for the last couple of weeks in the daily lectionary, and James is kind of in your face. James is a book that doesn't give us a whole lot of wiggle room. In the church, we call it conviction. In the church, we call it a book that kind of holds up a mirror to our face and says, this is who you really are. This is how you are really acting right now. And this is what needs to change. Well, what I've seen in the pandemic, in fact, it's something that I saw in Joplin after the tornado, is Joplin always had a reputation that when we got there, people would tell us about that stop signs were seen as optional. You sometimes could stop, you sometimes would not stop. Sometimes you would simply just race right through it. Well, right after the tornado, in the midst of a shared tragedy, but also some shared suffering, there was a rise of a shared empathy of sorts. And that lasted for a while, and it was great, and it continues in a unique way. But one thing I knew that Joplin was back to normal was when people started to run stop signs again. Well, the same thing I think is happening a little bit as we enter, or we're about in what, the ninth month of social distancing and of being separate from one another. I mean, this is hard. This is difficult to do this. At first, there is some level of empathy. There's some level of mutual support and encouragement. As this has lingered, in some ways, our behavior has become worse. You know, we make things like the question of wearing a mask into a political issue. We start talking about our individual rights without talking about our corporate responsibilities, that I am required and I am commanded to care about your safety as well as mine. What we hear also, especially this happens online quite a bit, and this is how we are communicating right now, is that we say things about other people. We write things and we speak things that are immensely hurtful and that are immensely cruel. And sometimes I think cruelty might be the point. There's an old song, it's cruel to be kind, but I think sometimes we are a special kind of cruel in the way we talk to one another. Now, this is nothing, there's nothing new under the sun. This has been going on for years. I mean, in our hearts, we are always 13 years old, is what I say, is that we are always cruel to one another in the way that we speak to and about one another. And James speaks to this. So I invite you to please listen, but understand that with conviction and with a hard message, there is a deeper hope. If there was no call to change, then we would simply be left in the exact same space we've always been. So from James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Not many of you should be teachers, brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and my sisters, this ought not to be. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. May this God's word speak to our hearts, our minds, our spirits. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I mentioned in our hearts we're all dealing with the same insecurities we felt when we were a tween or when we were a young teenager. Even going further back, I think about some of the lessons I learned when I was growing up, some of the lessons I learned in school growing up, and some of the things I learned from TV and film. A lot of the things that I learned about turned out to be wrong or not as big of a deal as I thought. I was listening to the comedian John Mulvaney, and he had a bit where he said, I thought that quicksand would be a much bigger deal. It was always on movies and cartoons, and the idea of seeing quicksand everywhere, well, I've never really encountered quicksand before. But talking is like quicksand. Talking about people, talking sideways about people, it's like quicksand, whether we see it or not. And before we know it, it's up to our ankles, and then it's up to our knees, and then it's up to our waist, and we cannot get out of it, not on our own, not without someone's help. This is James trying to help us. I remember also when I was a kid, I learned a phrase, and I know you've heard it before. Maybe you can say it along with me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't think I've ever heard something that is more incorrect. I don't think I've ever heard anything that's more incorrect. The idea that words cannot hurt. Because the truth of the matter is, bones heal, but harmful words stick around forever. We might say things, I'm rubber and you're glue, everything bounces off me and sticks to you, but in fact, so many of these harmful words, and we've all been on the receiving end of this, and sadly we've all been on the giving end of this as well. Those words that have caused harm to us, but also those words that have caused harm to one another. Loose lips might sink ships, but an overactive tongue will burn down an entire fleet. James is bringing the heat here. And he's prone to do that in our lectionary reading. The reading starts off, and it's not something easy for me to hear, but it's true. James starts off by saying, not many of you should be teachers. Not many of you really should be preachers or work in the church. Because teachers, those who teach, will be judged with greater strictness. Perhaps the reason we do that is that even though we make many mistakes, if we are in a leadership position, and we are modeling poor behavior, how much more condemnation will come down on us if others are seeing what we're doing, and from our actions, and in some cases our inactions in not speaking when we should, staying silent in the face of evil, which we know in the conflict between those who have power and those who have none. To stay silent is not to be neutral. It is to take the side of the powerful one and the oppression that remains. Leaders have to be careful about what we say, what we don't say, and also about what we do. So there's a word of challenge for me today, but a word of challenge for all of us is James acknowledging we're all going to sin. We're all going to do things we should not do. We're all going to make mistakes. And if you never make a mistake in speaking, then you are perfect. And yet we know we are not perfect. And James says it's a small thing. It's a small thing, the tongue. We can domesticate animals. We can build large ships. We can do all of these things, but we can't build up the courage or build up the strength to stop the tongue. We cannot bridle. We cannot control our mouths. The tongue is a small member. It boasts of great exploits, but also it does horrible things to other people. It is dangerous talk. And loose talk can feel like being stuck in quicksand. A simple rule of thumb. And we know that the tongue can set fires. But every time we set a fire, many times we burn down our own house by burning down our own relationship. Simply put, this is the homework. This is the reminder. Never say anything about someone else that you're not willing to say directly to them. I have talked a lot about this in my years of ministry. One of our greatest problems is we talk sideways as opposed to talking straight on. When we have an issue with someone else, we talk about that issue or about that person instead of talking directly to that person. Jesus says that if you're bringing your offering to church and you realize you have something against someone else, leave your offering, it'll wait. Go back and be reconciled to that person. It might be hard. Yes, relationships are hard and they can be tricky and difficult, but relationships call us, healthy relationships call us to honesty and to courage in the conversation. There's nothing courageous about talking about someone else. It takes courage to confront in kindness, to speak the truth in love, but also to be willing to hear the truth as well, to hold on to that mutual respect, but to possibly be changed in that encounter as we talk to one or another. At last, what James says is that can the same spring put forth both fresh and brackish water? I don't get to say the word brackish water very often. Can the same thing say both? Of course it can't. And a fig tree is not going to produce olives, grapes. An olive tree is not going to produce figs. So this is something to say that you cannot bless God with your mouth and then curse your neighbor with that same mouth. You cannot bless God and then curse someone who's created in God's image. This is a hard truth, but it is a truth nonetheless. I said you have homework assignments. The first one is the thing to work upon is first to remember, don't say anything about somebody you're not willing to say to their face. But also Jesus talks about this as well. Jesus is in favor of an economy of words. Jesus says, live your life in such a way that your yes means yes and your no means no. Simply stated that you do not have to keep on talking. You live your life in such a way that people respect your yes, and that people, they might not like it, but they will respect your no as well. You don't need to say anything else. You don't need to try to justify yourself by saying anything else. Jesus says anything beyond a yes or a no, it comes from the evil one. As I said, James holds up a mirror in front of all of our faces and shows us the way that we miss the mark, the way that we sin, the way that we cause harm to our neighbor, the way that we cause harm to ourselves, and the way that we cause harm to God. Think about what you say, to whom you say, not just with your words, not just in your interactions socially distanced, not just in phone conversations, but also especially online as well. And I am preaching to the choir as well here. Let us be careful with our words. Let our words build up and not tear down. Let our words heal and not burn. Let us be careful with this day. And I pray God bless you this day and that God uses you to be a blessing to someone else. This day and always, may God be with you.